Today on Inside Utah Politics, a campus controversy could mean new legislation. Why House Speaker Mike Schultz is promising new action to address transgender Utahns on college campuses. A fight over fluoride is brewing on Capitol Hill right now. How a planned bill looks to shake up the status quo. Making a grab for Greenland. What lengths the incoming president could be willing to go to secure the Arctic island.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Brien McElhatten. Let's go inside Utah politics. And first, the Utah House Speaker, Mike Schultz, is promising action on transgender Utahns' access to facilities on university campuses. This began with a now viral post from a mother concerned that her daughter moved into a dorm with a transgender resident advisor at Utah State University. Speaker Schultz heard about it and quite quickly said this, his quote, "We will not tolerate this any longer. In the session starting in 2 weeks, we will make it clear female spaces are for biological females only. No woman should ever feel compelled to relocate to feel safe and comfortable on our college campuses."
It's time we make Utah a place that takes care of our women, that stands up for girls and women.
So that's Cheryl Saltzman. She's the mother of the Utah State University student here at the center of this story. In a statement to ABC4, USU said this: Utah law specifically protects transgender individuals from discrimination in both housing and employment. The resident assistant in question applied, interviewed, and was selected through the same process as other RA applicants for the semester. And like all new university employees, new RAs must pass a background check. So joining us today to talk about this, we have Marina Lowe. She's the policy director with Equality Utah, which advocates for LGBTQ political causes in the state. Marina, thank you for being here.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
First of all, your reaction to this, because Speaker Schultz's reaction came very quick, and it surprised, I think, a lot of people how quickly it came. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I know this has been a topic that's been of great interest to the legislature and to the speaker over the past couple of years. And so I guess I'm not terribly surprised to see a response come out from the speaker, seeing an issue that crops up like this.
Yeah. I want to ask you about specific legislation as the session begins that your group might be tracking here.
So we'll obviously be keeping an eye on this situation. You know, the Utah legislature has passed a number of bills over the past couple of years focused on the LGBTQ community, or at least having great impact on that community. And so we'll be watching to see whether this year looks similar to previous years. I'm an optimist, and I think January is a great time to sort of turn the page and think about a brighter future. And so I'm really hoping that we aren't going to see so much in that area this legislative session. I know the legislature has a lot of other priorities that they're going to be focused on and has really covered a lot of these issues in the past 3 years. And so it's my hope that this might be a quieter session for the LGBTQ community.
In terms of the LGBTQ community, where is Utah in terms of acceptance, in terms of recognizing issues that affect our neighbors?
You know, I actually think Utah is really special and really unique in a wonderful way. We have a really wonderful track record when it comes to working with the legislature, sitting down, getting stakeholders around the table, working with sort of an ethos of fairness for all and finding solutions to really tricky problems. And, you know, this isn't just me surmising that this is the case here in Utah. We have a demonstrated track record. This started in 2015 with the passage of the Utah Compromise, which is probably the most important piece of legislation that Equality Utah has been involved in. Working with stakeholders, including the LDS Church, we sat down and passed legislation to protect the LGBTQ community from discrimination in housing and employment, and at the same time, also protecting the rights of religious folks. And so really demonstrating, I think, not just to our state, but to the country as well, that negotiating around difficult political issues is not a zero-sum game. Everybody can win. There can indeed be fairness for all.
So the ACLU last year tracked 576 bills that they classify as anti-LGBTQ in state legislatures all across the country.
Yeah.
Before that, the number was 510. So there was an increase from 2023 to 2024.
Yeah.
What's your outlook for 2025 as we see a very conservative administration taking over and conservatives in many states writing bills? What do you think?
You know, as I mentioned, I'm an optimist, so I'm hopeful that, we've tackled a lot of these issues already here in Utah. Last year we saw legislation around bathrooms and changing rooms and locker rooms. In years previous, we saw legislation dealing with transgender access to sports teams. We have seen issues around conversion therapy, so we've tackled a lot of these tricky issues. And I guess where my hope really remains strong is that no matter what comes our way, we in Utah know how to sit around the table with differing perspectives and differing points of view and feelings about really complicated issues, and we can nonetheless find solutions. Conversion therapy for minors is a great example. A couple of years ago, legislators in the Utah legislature wanted to, in fact, legalize a form of conversion therapy. And we sat down and we came up with a solution that worked for everybody. Ended up with a bill that was unanimously passed by the Utah legislature and yet still protected LGBTQ youth and also protected folks on the other side, therapists and others who wanted to be able to do their job with clarity and understanding about the rules.
How do you thread that needle when you're having these negotiations with people who have very strong opinions?
It's our secret sauce here in Utah.
What's the
it's
secret
what
to
makes
the sauce?
us special. I think what it really is going into these negotiations in good faith and sort of accepting that the person across from you, even if you don't feel the same about issues, has legitimate concerns, reasons to listen to their perspective. And really, when you sit down and you listen to learn and understand, and you're committed to being in that negotiation process with the end goal of coming up with a solution, you can get there. It's not always clear at the beginning that there's going to be a solution, but I will just say that in my time at the legislature, we have shown time and time again that you can get there if you want to.
What do you think both sides get wrong about each other? Perceptions matter when you go into negotiations, right?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think it's very easy to characterize the other side as, any concerns that they may have. I think sometimes on the left, we tend to do that. We minimize concerns on the other side and say, that's not a real concern, that's immediately, and we sort of tag it with some sort of, description that I think isn't always helpful. And vice versa. I think we tend to sort of just minimize each other's real concerns. And I think we have to listen to those and say, what is at the heart of that concern? Where is that concern really coming from? Is there something I can learn from? That person sitting opposite from me has their perspective, which is based on their life experiences, their own biases. We all have biases, right? The way that we grew up, the experiences that we've had. And just because those are different from mine doesn't make them any less legitimate. So I think when you start from that place, it's a lot easier to get to understanding. I try to make it a policy also when I go into these difficult conversations to spend the first conversation listening. Just listening, not there to make my argument or make my point, but just to hear. And then I can reflect and think back on that and then come up with, some responses. But my first reaction should always be to listen.
What do you think are the biggest issues right now affecting Utah's LGBTQ population? What are you really focusing on right now?
Well, I think following on several years of legislation that, whether it's the intent or not, I think feels very harmful for that community. I think it is Equality Utah's job and really all of our jobs to figure out ways to make people feel like they belong, that they are included, that they are welcome in all the same spaces that everyone else is, to really live out that truth that we are a country that values each and every one of us, that equality matters, that when we say fairness for all, that means fairness for all, each and every one of us, regardless of our sexual orientation, our gender identity, our race, our gender, any other characteristic that we all have.
These days, the media landscape is so different than it used to be, right? A lot of us exist in these silos, whether you're on the left or the right or some other political persuasion.
Yeah.
You tend to get news and information from sources that reaffirm your beliefs and values. And it can be difficult, I think, in that context to understand issues and understand the facts, right?
Yeah.
I know that when we have segments like this, we talk about LGBTQ issues, we will inevitably get an email from someone who says, why are you talking about it? We've heard the phrase, why are you shoving it down my throat? Move on to something else. How do you respond to people who feel that way? And how do we all try to understand each other better?
Yeah, I think it means forcing ourselves to go to those places that maybe we don't want to go to, and hear the stories and listen to the news that maybe it doesn't come from our own perspective. I know my own husband turns on different radio and news stations just so he can hear what the other side, so to speak, is saying. It's important to sort of understand how other people think and feel and their perspectives. And sometimes that's not comfortable. It's not always a comfortable place to stay. It's more comfortable to sit with your friends and people who feel exactly the same way that you do. But I think it's really important as human beings, as Americans, as Utahns, for us to understand that we all walk in different spaces, and those are all equally important. And it's because we live in a pluralistic country where the idea is that we are a mixing pot, and we're supposed to all figure out and get along and value each other's diversity. It's important to hear those other stories.
Yeah, and is that the message you try to tell lawmakers when you're up at Capitol Hill talking with them?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think we have borne that out over the years that we have been working up at the Capitol. We have demonstrated that we are negotiators in good faith, that we are willing to come to the table with real solutions, that we're willing to listen, to bring forth suggestions, and to work hard to get to a place where we can all feel satisfied with the end result.
Okay, Marina Lowe with Equality Utah. Thanks for being here. I know we'll have you on again.
Great.
Appreciate
Thank you.
it. Thank you. Still ahead here on Inside Utah Politics, defluoridating Utah's public drinking water. That's on the table this legislative session. So we dig into the arguments for and against. That's coming up next. Well, here's a question for you. Should fluoride be banned in Utah's drinking water? For at least one Utah lawmaker, the answer is yes. The bill will be considered during the upcoming legislative session. Instead of fluoride in the water, the bill would require health departments to write prescriptions for fluoride tablets for anybody who wants them. So what would that mean for your dental health? Well, we spoke with a dentist and health experts to find out.
It's not anti-fluoride, but it changes the delivery mechanism so that people can have a choice in whether or not they want to take that medication.
Representative Stephanie Grecius is sponsoring HB 81 in the upcoming legislative session. It would prohibit adding fluoride to public water systems. She says a constituent brought it up to her during the last session, and that's what made her take up the issue now.
If you look at it from the perspective of preventing tooth decay, in a lot of ways, we're increasing fluoride access to the rest of the state. Only 2 counties in Utah even fluoridate water right now, Salt Lake County and Davis County. The rest of the state does not. And so by deregulating that prescription fluoride tablet, you're now giving access to it to rural Utah.
Salt Lake County began fluoridating its water after citizens voted for it in 2000.
We can control the dosage very precisely through the water systems. There's a recommended level for the benefits of fluoridation to our oral and dental health. And we're able to do that through the water system really efficiently. And that way fluoride gets to every community member, regardless of their age, their income status, their access to dental care. That's really the biggest benefit to delivering fluoride through community water systems, is that it reaches everyone.
Salt Lake and Davis counties currently maintain fluoride levels at 0.7%, which is enough to reduce the risk of wear on your tooth enamel. We spoke to a dentist from Utah County, which doesn't put fluoride in its water.
I assume that places they do fluoride in the water, they put fluoride in the water, that it's monitored very carefully, because you're right. In the wrong amounts, it can not only cause fluorosis of your teeth and damage to your bones, but it can cause all kinds of troubles. Matter of fact, there are places that have natural fluoride in the water that's way too much, and people end up getting fluorosis in their teeth. They're rock hard, but they are mottled and not nice looking.
Mark Fulmer has been a dentist for 3 decades, and he says he's noticed a difference in places that don't fluoridate water.
When I was in dental school 38 years ago, I was in San Francisco where they fluoridated the water, and the only children I saw with rampant decay were refugee children. So just by having it there, it cut down on it so much. It was a very practical experience for me to be able to see that.
He also responds to claims of fluoride reducing IQ or other reported side effects.
You look at the good science and the peer-reviewed science from dentistry in general, and the benefits far outweigh the detriment.
But at the end of the day, he says it's everyone's choice to make.
I believe that people have their their own opportunities to decide. I think it's a good thing, but I also understand people that don't want to have that, for lack of a better term, shoved down their throat, that to have to do something like that. So I understand that, but I also understand the benefit. And I see that as something that's easily monitored and is just something that's going to help people out.
So stay tuned for that. In other news, it was Inauguration Week here in Utah. Governor Spencer Cox and Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson took the oath of office this week, along with other state officials. They spoke about Utah's culture as the driver of the state's successes. Henderson gave her address first. She compared Utah's Capitol building with its bold features, its delicate details, to Utah's culture and work ethic. Governor Cox touched on declining birth rates and what he perceives as a lack of community across the country. But he said Utah still believes in faith, family, and community values he insists the state should cling to.
Utah must stand tall as that shining city on a hill. We must be different. There is no government program we can create or law we can pass that will solve these problems.
Governor Cox says understanding Utah's successes is a simple thing to do. It's families, friends, and the neighbors, he says, that call this state home. Governor Spencer Cox and the Utah Sheriff's Association also wrote a joint letter to Tom Homan, the newly appointed border czar, as well as South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, President-elect Donald Trump's pick to lead the Department of Homeland Security. They've asked for an immediate leadership change in the Salt Lake City Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office. Their second request is to suspend or alter unreasonable detention standards, they say, that are complicating the county's ability to hold detainees. And the final request is for additional funding for jail beds and transportation. They hope that would allow the state to quickly deport those who pose a threat to public safety. State lawmakers are showing off their plans now to tackle illegal immigration at the state level as well. The governor announced that Utah would be working to help the incoming Trump administration with its border policy. They said that back in November. Our Kate Gardner has more on that.
Lawmakers are preparing to introduce nearly a dozen bills aimed at illegal immigration. Now, these bills will address different topics like the fentanyl crisis, gang violence, and more. Inside the state capitol,
every state is now a border state. We welcome all who come here legally, wishing to call Utah and the U.S. home.
Lawmakers prepare to introduce a package of bills.
We cannot and will not turn a blind eye to the impacts that the recent surge of illegal immigration is having on our state, businesses, and citizens.
Representative Carrie Ann Lisenby says the bills aim to improve public safety and address the southern border crisis. Representative Candace Perucci will introduce a bill that raises the criminal penalty for Class A misdemeanors from 364 days prison time to 365 days.
To help expedite the deportation of people who come here illegally or come here seeking temporary asylum and then commit crimes in our state. ICE has made it very clear in our discussions with them that they cannot deport someone who's just served 364 days, but they will for 365.
Senator Heidi Baldery will introduce a bill that will give police more power to remove squatters.
This bill also increases penalties for squatters who cause property damage or fraudulently sell or lease out a property that they do not own.
Another bill will increase penalties for unlicensed drivers.
Almost half of the car accidents in West Valley that West Valley PD has responded to this last year involved at least one unlicensed driver.
And one bill increases penalties for those who traffic fentanyl. In 2023, law enforcement seized 2 million fentanyl pills in the state.
Obviously, the challenge of fentanyl goes way beyond immigration, but there's no doubt that these drugs are coming across our porous southern border and are being peddled by transnational drug cartels and gangs who are profiting off of the addictions of Utahns.
The bills will likely be numbered and made public within the next week or two. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Kate Garner, ABC4 News.
And Utah's legislative session begins later this month, January 21st. That's the day after the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And ABC4 will be live from the Capitol Rotunda with comprehensive coverage of everything you need to know. That will begin on ABC4 News at midday on January 21st. Still to come here, American imperialism. President-elect Donald Trump says he wants to control Greenland, the case he's making for a territorial expansion.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
President-elect Donald Trump says he wants to take over control of Greenland and the Panama Canal, and he says he can't rule out using military force to do that. Washington, D.C. correspondent Hannah Brien has more on the expansionist goals.
President-elect Donald Trump is making waves with a promise to take over Greenland and the Panama Canal.
We need them for economic security.
And he refused to rule out the possibility that he'll use military action to seize the territories.
I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that he'll have to do something.
President-elect Trump has repeatedly talked about his desire to expand America's territory, and he argues taking control of Greenland and the Panama Canal would have benefits for U.S. trade and military power.
Giving the Panama Canal to Panama was a very big mistake. We need Greenland for national security purposes.
This pledge comes as the incoming president's son, Don Jr., landed in Greenland this morning, though officials in Greenland say he's there as a private citizen, and he didn't share any thoughts on his father's plan to seize the Arctic territory.
That's not for me to talk about. That's for others to talk about. But thank you guys. We're just excited to be here.
Greenland is a territory of Denmark, and Danish leaders quickly pushed back on the idea of a U.S. takeover, telling reporters Greenland is not for sale. The president of Panama has also rejected Trump's plan,
La soberanía,
saying the sovereignty and independence of our country are non-negotiable. But the president-elect is promising his upcoming term will be a golden age of America, even saying he wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico and instead call it
the Gulf of America. What a beautiful name.
In Washington, I'm Hannah Brien.
4 years after the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, the Department of Justice says it's charged more than 1,000 people with federal crimes, and President-elect Donald Trump has promised to pardon at least some of them. Washington correspondent Vinay Simlat walks us through the status of those January 6th cases.
Rioters stormed the Capitol 4 years ago trying to stop the certification of President Joe Biden's election. The Department of Justice says prosecutors have charged more than 1,500 people. 1,100 have already been sentenced. The leader of the Proud Boys received the longest, 22 years in prison.
One of the most shameful, reprehensible episodes in the history of this great nation.
Attorney General Merrick Garland called it an unprecedented attack on the peaceful transfer of power. He says Capitol Police were punched, tackled, tased, and attacked with chemical agents.
America saw what happened. People died that day.
4 years later, the riots prompted the same level of security on January 6th as a presidential inauguration. These fences surround the Capitol. Local and federal law enforcement are helping U.S. Capitol Police as Congress meets inside to certify the election victory of President-elect Donald Trump. Trump promised to pardon some of the people charged with crimes on January 6th as soon as his first day in office. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene says that's a good move.
They've been mistreated far worse than anything that we've ever seen in our history.
Democrats say they disagree.
Pardoning them would set a terrible example.
In a Washington Post op-ed, President Biden accused Republicans of an unrelenting effort to downplay January 6th, adding, "We cannot allow the truth to be lost." In Washington, I'm Vinay Simlat.
Utah had 14 people found guilty of some sort of crime related to the riots on January 6th. Their sentences range from probation or fines to 6 years in prison on the upper end, and they come from all corners of our state. We'll be sure to stay tuned to any pardons from the incoming Trump administration to see how they affect those Utahns. Stay with us, everyone. More Inside Utah Politics coming up right after this. Well, that does it for today's Inside Utah Politics. Don't forget, if you have any local political stories you'd like to see, make sure to reach out to us. You can email InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on social media, on X @Brien Reports, and on Instagram. Just search for Brien McElhatten. And you can find ABC4 on social media too to follow along no matter where you are. And while you're at it, you can download the ABC4 News app. We are always on there. Thanks so much for being with us, everyone. We'll see you right back here on Inside Utah Politics next week.